The bills hit the floor one at a time. Not dropped. Thrown. The specific, deliberate motion of someone making a point with someone else's money. Brett Collier's hand sweeping across the pharmacy counter with the practiced contempt of a man who had done this kind of thing before and had never once been corrected for it. $3.70 landed on the linoleum of Crawford's Pharmacy on Fifth Avenue. Harold Bennett looked down at it. 76 years old. Veteran's cap. The embroidered kind with the unit insignia, worn at the specific angle of someone who had worn it for decades without thinking about the angle. Hearing aid in the left ear. He had placed those bills on the counter himself, carefully after counting them twice, apologizing quietly to the cashier for coming up short on the blood pressure prescription that cost $14.40 and that he needed by evening. He had asked if he could come back tomorrow with the rest. Brett Collier had heard the question. He had answered with the floor. "Pick it up and step aside," Brett said. Loud enough for the three people behind Harold in line to hear clearly. "You're holding up the line." The pharmacy went quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from nothing happening. The kind that came from something happening that everyone witnessed and nobody moved on. Harold looked at the bills on the floor. His jaw worked once. He reached for the shelf edge beside the counter, the reflex of a man whose knees required assistance on the way down, and he lowered himself. Fully. The deliberate, careful movement of a body that had given a great deal to a great many years and was now asking in exchange only for a reasonable amount of time to complete simple tasks. He picked up his own money from the floor. He straightened. He put it in his coat pocket. He turned from the counter without saying anything. The man at the back of the line had already set down his basket. Vincent Malone did not walk fast. He had never needed to. Speed was for people who required arrival to be announced. He moved at the pace of someone who had permanently stopped caring about lines and whose presence rearranged rooms without requiring volume. He passed the first person in line. He passed the second. He stopped at the counter. He looked at the prescription slip still sitting on the counter where Harold had left it. He picked it up. He set it in front of the pharmacist. He placed a $50 bill beside it. "Fill it," he said. Brett looked at him. Brett did the thing that people did when they looked at Vincent Malone. The rapid involuntary assessment that processed suit, posture, stillness, the two men who had appeared near the entrance without apparently having walked there. The confidence Brett Collier had been operating on for 10 years evaporated in the space of approximately 4 seconds. His mouth opened. It did not produce words. "And you'll want to apologize to this man," Vincent said. His voice was the specific register of someone who had said a thing and would not say it again. "No." In front of everyone who just watched that. Brett's mouth stayed open. He looked at Harold, who had stopped near the greeting card display with his coat pocket holding $3.70 and his veteran's cap at its lifelong angle. He looked at Vincent. Brett started. Vincent looked at him with the flat patience of someone reading a page they have already memorized. The apology came out immediately. Stammered. Audible to the entire pharmacy. Harold looked at Vincent across the distance between the greeting cards and the counter. "You didn't have to do that," Harold said. "I know," Vincent said. "That's why I did it." The pharmacist filled the prescription. Vincent waited at the counter. He did not look at Brett again. Brett moved to the back of the pharmacy and stayed there. Harold came back to the counter when his name was called. He took the prescription bag. He looked at it. He looked at Vincent. "I don't know you," Harold said. "No," Vincent said. "Can I know your name?" "Vincent," he said. Harold held the bag. He held out his hand. Vincent shook it. The handshake of a man who meant it. Harold's grip still firm, the grip of someone who had worked with his hands for 50 years and kept the strength long after the work was done. "Thank you, Vincent," Harold said. He walked to the door. He did not look at Brett on his way out. Vincent watched him go. He picked up his change from the counter. He left. In the parking lot he sat in his car for a moment. He looked at the pharmacy entrance. He thought about a man bending to the floor for his own money. He thought about his father. His father had never bent for anyone. Not once. Not in 68 years. And the people who had tried to make him bend had eventually understood why that had been a mistake. Vincent pressed his hand flat on the steering wheel. He started the car. He did not know yet that Harold Bennett was connected to something that was about to make this afternoon considerably more significant than a pharmacy on Fifth Avenue. But he was going to find out. Harold Bennett walked 3 blocks to the bus stop on 5th and Cedar. He sat on the bench. He held the prescription bag in his lap and the November cold wrapped around him the way November cold did when you were 76 and your coat had been purchased in 2019 and had not been replaced because coats were one of the things that could wait. The bus was 12 minutes away. He looked at his watch. His wife Ruth had bought him the watch in 1987 for their 10th anniversary. Silver face, leather band, the kind of watch that had been repaired 3 times and was still more accurate than anything produced in the last decade. He wound it every morning. Ruth had been gone for 4 years and he wound it every morning. He held the prescription bag. He was $2.30 short on a $14 blood pressure prescription because his pension covered most things but not all things, and the month's timing had been difficult, and he had told himself he would manage it tomorrow when the situation was cleaner. The man at the pharmacy had not given him the option of tomorrow. He had given him the floor. Harold pressed his lips together. He had not been given the floor since 1971. He had been 23 years old and stationed somewhere he was not allowed to describe, and a man 3 ranks above him had given him the floor in a different way. Not money, something else. And Harold had looked at the floor for exactly 2 seconds and then looked up and never looked at the floor again. He pressed his lips together. He held the prescription bag. The bus came. Vincent drove for 11 minutes before his phone rang. "Price. I've been sitting on something I thought you should know," Price said. "About a building on Archer Street." "Tell me," Vincent said. "A man named Collier," Price said. "Brett Collier." Vincent's hand on the wheel went still. "The pharmacy manager," he said. Price paused. "You know him?" Price said. "I met him 40 minutes ago," Vincent said. "Go ahead." "Brett Collier manages the Crawfords on 5th, Price said. "He also manages a rental property on Archer Street, 3 units. He's been the owner of record for 2 years. Another pause. "One of his tenants is a 76-year-old man named Harold Bennett. Unit 1A. Month-to-month lease." Vincent held the wheel. "The building on Archer Street," Vincent said. "What's the condition?" "Inspection was flagged 4 months ago," Price said. "Heating system failure. 2 units reported inadequate heat for 6 weeks last winter." Harold Bennett filed one of the complaints. He paused. "The complaint was closed after Collier submitted a repair certification. Our source says the repair was cosmetic. The system is still marginal." Vincent looked at the road. "Collier owns the building where Harold Bennett lives," he said. "And Harold is 2 months behind on rent," Price said. "Collier filed a non-payment notice 3 weeks ago." Vincent pressed his hand flat on the wheel. "How did you find this?" he said. "I was looking into Collier for a different reason," Price said. "He's connected to a property portfolio managed by someone you know. The Archer Street building is one of 6. "Who manages the portfolio?" Vincent said. Price told him. The name was not a surprise. It was also not a name Vincent had expected to encounter on a Wednesday afternoon that had started with a pharmacy stop. "Send me everything," Vincent said. "Already sent," Price said. He ended the call. He drove. He thought about Harold bending for his money on a pharmacy floor. He thought about Harold living in a building owned by the man who threw it there. He thought about the specific cold architecture of that situation. A man who humiliated his tenant in a pharmacy because he could, because the power differential was complete, because Harold had nowhere to go that wasn't further into the same person's territory. He thought about his father. His father had spent his life identifying the specific people who built their authority on the humiliation of people who had nowhere else to go. He had spent considerable time addressing them. Vincent had inherited several things from his father. The address book was one. The approach was another. He pulled over. He called his driver. "The bus stop on 5th and Cedar," he said. "There's an elderly man, veteran's cap, prescription bag, brown overcoat. Make sure he gets home. Don't announce yourself. Just make sure." He pulled back into traffic. The person managing the Archer Street portfolio along with 5 other buildings in the same corridor was a man named Grant Holloway. Grant Holloway was someone Vincent had been watching for 8 months for entirely different reasons. The pharmacy on 5th Avenue had just connected a Wednesday afternoon errand to a situation that had been building for considerably longer. Harold Bennett did not know any of this. He was on a bus holding his prescription. He did not know that the stranger who paid for his medication was about to discover something about his landlord that would explain the floor in an entirely different way. He did not know that the floor was not an accident. Price's file arrived at 4:15. Vincent read it at his desk. Grant Holloway. I'm 54 years old. Property portfolio across 7 addresses in the Fifth Avenue corridor, all acquired in the last 6 years. The properties shared a common characteristic. They were occupied predominantly by elderly tenants on fixed incomes, most of them month-to-month leases, most of them paying below current market rates because they had been in the buildings before Holloway acquired them. Holloway's acquisition model was specific. He bought buildings where tenants could not easily leave. Then he let the buildings deteriorate. Filed repair certifications for work that was cosmetic or incomplete. Generated non-payment notices when tenants filed complaints. Used the non-payment notices as the basis for eviction filings. When the eviction filings created vacancies, he renovated minimally and relet at current market rates, which in the Fifth Avenue corridor over 6 years had increased by 62%. He had done this to 4 of his 7 buildings. 3 buildings were still in the process. The Archer Street building was one of them. Brett Collier. Price had found the connection in the pharmacy's business registration records. Collier was listed as the property manager of record for 3 of Holloway's 7 buildings, including Archer Street. His name was on the management contracts. He collected the rent. He filed the maintenance certifications. He delivered the non-payment notices. He was the operational layer between Holloway and the tenants. The person the tenants dealt with. The person who appeared at the pharmacy. Vincent pressed his hands flat on the desk. He looked at the file. He thought about Brett Collier behind a pharmacy counter, dropping Harold's bills on the floor. This was not an impulsive act of small authority cruelty. This was a man who had been making Harold's life difficult for months, filing notices, delaying repairs, building a record, and had seen him in a pharmacy $2.30 short on his medication. He had not been able to resist. Some people could not resist. Some people, when they had already decided to tear something down, needed the small moments of cruelty as proof to themselves that they were right to do it. Vincent called Price. Harold Bennett's non-payment notice, he said. The 2 months behind. What's the actual history? Harold has paid on time for 4 years, Price said. The first late payment was in September. He submitted a rent withholding notice in August citing the heating failure from last winter. Another pause. Under the state tenant protection statute, a rent withholding notice is legally valid when essential services have failed. The notice he submitted was within his rights. Collier filed the non-payment notice anyway, Vincent said. Yes, Price said. Which is legally improper when a valid rent withholding notice has been submitted. But the process works against tenants who don't have legal resources to challenge the filing. He paused. Harold doesn't have legal resources. Who else in the building filed complaints? Vincent said. 3 other tenants, Price said. One of them has already vacated, an 80-year-old woman named Edna Marsh. She moved to her daughter's in October. The other 2 are still there. A 63-year-old named Frank Riley and a 71-year-old named Sophie Lamb. Vincent held the phone. 4 tenants. 1 is already gone. 3 holding on. All of them in a building that had been deliberately mismanaged to produce exactly this outcome. The eviction filing, Vincent said. Collier's filing against Harold. What stage? Notice of non-payment was served 3 weeks ago, Price said. Harold has until the end of the month to respond or vacate. Pause. He hasn't responded because he doesn't know he legally can. Vincent looked at the desk. Elena Cross, he said. Can she take this today? I'll call her, Price said. And I need everything on Holloway's property inspection records, Vincent said. All 7 buildings. Every certification, every complaint filed, every repair documented. Cross-referenced against the actual condition of the systems at the time of certification. That's a week of work, Price said. Give me the first building by tomorrow morning, Vincent said. Archer Street. Tomorrow morning, Price said. Vincent ended the call. He stood. He went to the window. Fifth Avenue from 7 floors up was the ordinary city. People moving, cars moving, the November afternoon going about its business without any awareness of what was being assembled in a sixth-floor office on its left side. He thought about Harold on a bus with his prescription. He thought about 3 other tenants in a building where the heat had failed last winter and the certification said it hadn't. He thought about Edna Marsh, 80 years old, who had moved to her daughter's in October. He thought about what it cost to leave the building you had lived in, to pack what you could carry and go to your daughter's and start over at 80 years old because a man named Holloway had decided your building was worth more without you in it. He pressed his hand against the glass. But there was something Price had not told him yet. Something that was in the file but that Vincent had not reached yet when the call came in. Something about Grant Holloway's relationship to a city official. Something that explained why 4 years of tenant complaints about 7 buildings had resulted in 0 formal enforcement actions. And why the certifications which were fraudulent had been accepted every time. Someone in the city's housing inspection office was signing off on paperwork they had not reviewed. And that person's name was in Price's file. Vincent drove to Archer Street at 6 in the evening. He did not go inside. He parked across from the building and looked at it. 4-story brick 1960s construction. The kind of building that had been built to last and had lasted and was now aging in the way that buildings aged when their maintenance budget had been redirected to profit margins. The cornice had a crack running from the 3rd floor to the roofline. 2 windows on the 2nd floor had plastic sheeting across the inside. Not the temporary kind, the kind that had been there through seasons. The front steps had a new patch of concrete on the right side that was noticeably lighter than the surrounding surface, which meant the crack had been patched without being structurally addressed. 3 of the 4 floors had lights. Harold's window, 1st floor left side, had a lamp on. An orange lamp, the kind with a fabric shade, the kind that had been purchased for a different apartment in a different decade and had traveled here. Vincent watched the lamp. He thought about his father. Martin Malone had grown up in a building on this same street. Not this building, a different one 3 doors down that had been demolished in the 90s. He had grown up in it with his parents and 2 sisters in a 3rd-floor apartment that had a window that faced another building and never got morning light. His father had told this story once. Not as tragedy. As orientation. He had said, "I grew up in a building where the landlord came twice a year. Once for the rent check and once to look at the boiler so he could tell himself he was managing things. The people in that building lived their whole lives and he never learned their names." Vincent had been 17 when his father told this. He had been standing in a room that looked nothing like a 3rd-floor apartment without morning light. He had understood at 17 that the distance between the room he was standing in and the room his father had grown up in was the direct product of every decision his father had made in the intervening years. He had also understood that his father carried the apartment with him. That the orange lamp in the window and the neighbor whose boiler complaint went unanswered lived in his father somewhere close to the surface, available to be reached by the right moment. Vincent pressed his hands flat on the wheel. He looked at Harold's lamp. He went to see Harold. He knocked at 7. Harold answered. He looked at Vincent in his doorway and the specific assessment of a veteran, rapid, accurate, stored without performance, happened in about 3 seconds. "The pharmacy man," Harold said. "Yes," Vincent said. "I'd like to talk." Harold stepped back. The apartment smelled of coffee and the particular warm domesticity of a space cared for by someone who had been caring for spaces for a long time. A framed photograph of Ruth on the bookshelf. A folded American flag in a display case on the wall. Not decorative. The real kind, the kind that came in a triangle. Harold had not displayed it prominently, he had placed it where he could see it from his chair. Harold's chair faced the window. The orange lamp was between the chair and the window. There were 2 chairs at the kitchen table. Harold put on coffee without asking. They sat. "You know who Brett Collier is to me," Harold said. Not a question. "Yes," Vincent said. "Price," Harold said. Vincent looked at him. Harold held his coffee. "I've been around long enough to know how people find things out," Harold said. "Someone looked into Brett and found Archer Street and found me." He held the cup. "Fair enough." "The rent withholding notice," Vincent said. "You were within your rights to file it." "I know I was," Harold said. "I also know that being within your rights and having the resources to enforce your rights are 2 different situations." He looked at the lamp. "The heat failed in January. February we had 3 weeks below 40 degrees in the corridor. Sophie Lamb, she's 71, 3rd floor, She had to sleep in the kitchen because the kitchen has a gas stove and she could run it for warmth. He held the cup. I filed the complaint. Collier filed a certification 3 weeks later saying the system was repaired. They sent an inspector. He paused. The inspector signed off. The inspector's name, Vincent said. Harold looked at him. Raymond Voss, Harold said. He's been the inspector for this district for 11 years. Every complaint filed against this building goes to Raymond Voss. Vincent held the coffee. He looked at the table. Raymond Voss was the name in Price's file that he had not reached yet. Harold had gotten there independently. Have you ever met Voss? Vincent said. Once, Harold said. When he came for the inspection. He was in the building for 11 minutes. Signed the certification and left. Harold held his cup. The boiler was running when he was here. It stopped running adequately 3 days later. He pressed his lips together. The next complaint went to Voss. He responded that the system had been certified 30 days prior and the certification was still valid. 11 years, Vincent said. Voss has been district inspector for 11 years. Yes, Harold said. And in 11 years, no enforcement action on any Holloway property, Vincent said. Harold looked at him. He held the cup. You know Holloway, he said. I know his file, Vincent said. Harold held the cup. He looked at the window. And here, right here in the middle of this story we want to stop. Because this is the question. Have you ever watched someone in authority treat a person with fewer resources like they didn't matter? A manager, an inspector, a landlord. Someone who used their position to make someone else's life harder because they could? And what did you do? What could you do? Tell us in the comments. Because what Vincent does next is the answer that comes when someone finally has both the knowledge and the means to make the system account for itself. Harold held the cup. He looked at the lamp. I don't want charity, he said. I'm clear about that. I know, Vincent said. I want the heat to work, Harold said. I want Sophie on the 3rd floor to not sleep in her kitchen in February. He held the cup. I want Edna Marsh to be able to come back to her apartment if she wants to. He set the cup on the table. He looked at Vincent. Can you do anything about that? He said. Vincent held the table with both hands. Yes, he said. I can. Harold held his gaze. He nodded once. He picked up his coffee. Then stay for dinner, he said. I made too much chili. Vincent held the table. He stayed for dinner. Price called at 7 the next morning. Voss, he said. Raymond Voss has been on Holloway's payroll for 9 years. Vincent was already at his desk. How? He said. A property, Price said. Holloway transferred a 1-bedroom condominium in the Riverside development to an LLC controlled by Voss's wife in 2015. The transfer was recorded but the connection to Voss was obscured by the LLC structure. Voss. The condo is currently rented at market rate. Voss's wife collects the income. Another pause. In 9 years, Voss has certified 31 Holloway property inspections. 23 of them have subsequently received tenant complaints describing conditions inconsistent with the certification. 23 fraudulent certifications, Vincent said. In 9 years, Price said. Across 5 buildings. And the City Housing Authority accepted all of them, Vincent said. The certifications went to one desk, Price said. Voss's supervisor, a director named Sandra Merritt. She processes the certifications. She's been the director for 7 years. 2 years after Voss started, Vincent said. Yes, Price said. I'm looking at Merritt now. Give me until noon. Noon, Vincent said. He ended the call. He looked at the desk. He thought about a system. Not a corrupt official. A system. A chain of small, specific relationships. Holloway acquired properties, Collier managed them, Voss certified them, Merritt processed the certifications. The chain completed itself and the tenants filed complaints that went to Voss and came back as valid certifications and the loop closed without ever producing an outcome. Harold Bennett, Frank Riley, Sophie Lamb. Edna Marsh, who had already left. And hundreds of others across 23 buildings over 9 years. Brett Collier made his move at 9:15. Vincent found out from Price at 9:30. Collier had delivered a formal eviction notice to Harold's door. Not the non-payment notice that had been filed 3 weeks ago, the formal legal notice. The kind that started the clock on a court filing. He accelerated the timeline, Price said. He saw me in the pharmacy yesterday, Vincent said. He knows something happened. He's trying to create a fait accompli before anyone can act. The notice gives Harold 15 days to vacate or contest, Price said. Contesting requires a court appearance and legal representation. Elena, Vincent said. I already called her, Price said. She's filing a response today. But there's a problem. Pause. Collier has moved simultaneously on Frank Riley. Filed a non-payment notice for the same month as Harold's. Another pause. And there's a building inspection scheduled for the Archer Street building tomorrow morning. Voss is on schedule. Vincent went still. Voss is scheduled to inspect tomorrow, he said. If he certifies the building again before Elena's response is processed, Price said, Collier has a current certification to point to. It makes the eviction filing cleaner. The inspection is tomorrow morning, Vincent said. What time? 8 a.m., Price said. Cancel it, Vincent said. Price was quiet for a moment. I can't cancel a city housing inspection, Price said. No, Vincent said. But the City Housing Authority director can. He pressed his hands flat on the desk. Who has oversight of merit? The Deputy Commissioner of Housing, Price said. A man named Wallace. Does Wallace know me? Vincent said. No, Price said. But Wallace's predecessor did. And Wallace has been in the position for 8 months and is still navigating his relationships with the department. He paused. He would respond to the right introduction. Get me Wallace, Vincent said. This morning. Price called back at 10:20. Wallace took the call at 10:45. Vincent gave him 4 minutes of specific documented information. The Voss Holloway condominium transfer, the 23 fraudulent certifications, the merit processing chain. He did not threaten. He did not perform. He presented facts to a man who had been in his position for 8 months and had been wondering for some of those months whether the inspection certification process under merit had the integrity it was supposed to have. Wallace listened. He asked 2 questions. Vincent answered both. Wallace called him back at 11:15. The Archer Street inspection scheduled for tomorrow morning has been reassigned, Wallace said. Voss is being placed on administrative leave pending a review. Merit has been notified that her certification processing is under audit. Pause. I'll need the full documentation package by the end of business today. You'll have it by 3, Vincent said. He called Price. The documentation package, he said. To Wallace. 3 o'clock. On it, Price said. He called Elena. The eviction filing against Harold Bennett, she said before he could speak. I've filed a response citing the rent withholding statute and the fraudulent certification history. I've also filed for the other tenants, Riley and Lamb. They all had the same complaint history. She paused. And Edna Marsh. She has a legal right to return to her unit. Can you enforce that? He said. If the eviction filings are improper, which they are, she has a claim for wrongful displacement, Elena said. We can file for her today. File for her today, he said. He ended the call. He sat at his desk. He pressed both hands flat on the surface. He looked at the clock. 11:47. In the last 2 hours the inspection had been cancelled, Voss was on administrative leave, Merit was under audit, and 3 simultaneous legal responses had been filed against Collier's eviction proceedings. What remained was Holloway. The man who had built the architecture. The man who had acquired 7 buildings and selected the tenants who couldn't fight back and employed the manager who humiliated them and paid the inspector who certified the neglect. The man at the top of the chain. Holloway did not yet know that the chain had been cut at 3 points simultaneously. He found out at noon. His attorney called him. Holloway called Collier. Collier did not answer. Collier was in a meeting with the pharmacy's corporate ownership, who had, in the last 40 minutes, received a documented complaint about the incident at the 5th Avenue location, with a specific list of witnesses and a detailed description of what had been done with Harold Bennett's money. Corporate had called Collier into the office. Collier was not having a good Wednesday. Holloway called his attorney back. What is my exposure? He said. His attorney told him. Holloway went quiet for 30 seconds. Find out who is behind this, he said. His attorney found out in 45 minutes. Holloway called back at 1:15. Vincent Malone, his attorney said. Holloway held the phone. He pressed his lips together. He had heard the name. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Can we settle?" His attorney said he would make contact. The contact came through Elena's office at 1:50. Elena called Vincent at 2. "Holloway wants to discuss terms," she said. "Good," Vincent said. "Tell him the terms are not negotiable and they're coming from the tenants, not from me." He sent Elena the list. Elena's terms were specific. She had written them at her desk in the 2 hours between the filing responses and the settlement inquiry, and she had written them with the precision of someone who had been in housing law for 14 years and knew exactly which words produced which outcomes. The terms: full remediation of the Archer Street building's heating system, not certification of the existing system, replacement. Contracted to a firm not connected to Holloway's portfolio. Completed within 60 days with independent verification at 30-day intervals. Withdrawal of all eviction filings against Harold Bennett, Frank Riley and Sophie Lamb. Permanent. Not refiled on any basis related to the rent withholding notices. Retroactive rent credits for the months during which essential services had failed. Credited against any outstanding balances. Edna Marsh. Formal offer of reinstatement to her original unit with relocation assistance if she chose to return, and a financial settlement for wrongful displacement if she did not. Written notice to the remaining tenants in all 7 Holloway properties of their rights under the State Tenant Protection Statute, sent by certified mail and signed by Holloway personally. And one more thing. Elena had added it at the end on her own authority, and had called Vincent to tell him about it before she sent it. "The last item," she said. "You can take it out if you want." "Read it to me," he said. She read it. He was quiet for a moment. "Leave it in," he said. The last item required Collier to personally deliver a written apology to Harold Bennett at his home address on Archer Street, witnessed and notarized, referencing the specific incident at Crawford's Pharmacy and the pattern of conduct toward the Archer Street tenants. Collier's personal apology. Delivered to Harold's door. Holloway's attorney called back at 4. "My client accepts most of the terms," the attorney said. "Which ones doesn't he accept?" Elena said. "The last item," the attorney said. "The personal apology. He feels that's non-negotiable," Elena said. "Ms. Cross. He committed fraud across 23 certifications spanning 9 years," Elena said. "He employed a manager who systematically harassed elderly tenants. The last item is non-negotiable." "I'll need to consult," the attorney said. "You have until 5 o'clock, Elena said. At 4:57 Holloway's attorney called back. "My client accepts all terms," he said. Elena called Vincent. "All terms," she said. "Signed by 6 o'clock. He pressed his hand flat on the desk. He thought about the orange lamp. He thought about Sophie Lamb sleeping in her kitchen with the gas stove. He thought about Edna Marsh packing what she could carry and going to her daughter's in October. He thought about Harold on the floor of a pharmacy. He thought about his father's apartment on a street 3 doors from Archer. "Thank you," he said to Elena. "Thank you for the documentation," she said. "Voss and Merritt. The audit Wallace opened is going to produce significant findings. That's going to take a while, but it's going to be significant. Let me know what you need," he said. He ended the call. He sat at his desk. He looked at the window. Outside, Fifth Avenue was doing what it always did. He picked up his phone. He called Harold. Harold answered on the 3rd ring. "The eviction is withdrawn," Vincent said. "All 3 yours, Frank Riley's, Sophie Lamb's." He held the phone. "The building heating system is being replaced. Not repaired. Replaced. Independent verification at 30-day intervals." He paused. "Edna Marsh has a formal offer to return to her apartment." Harold was quiet. The quiet of a man who had been holding something tightly for a long time and had just been told he could put it down. "The inspector?" Harold said. "On administrative leave," Vincent said. "The full audit of his certifications is under review by the deputy commissioner." "The director," Harold said. "Merritt." "Under audit," Vincent said. Another silence. "The apology," Harold said. "Collier. Is that part of this?" "It will be delivered to your door," Vincent said. "Witnessed and notarized." He paused. "You don't have to accept it. You don't have to open the door. It's your call. Harold held the phone. When? Harold said. This week, Vincent said. A long pause. I'll open the door, Harold said. He should have said it. In person. To my face. He paused. Not for me. For Sophie. For Edna. He held the phone. They should have had someone say it to them a long time ago. Vincent held the phone. Yes, he said. He ended the call. He sat at his desk. He looked at his hands. He pressed both of them flat on the surface. He thought about a pharmacy floor. He thought about the specific cold decision of a man who had decided that Harold Bennett bending for his money was acceptable. He thought about how many times that decision had been made. In the building, in the certification, in the filing, in the chain of small permissions that had accumulated into years of cold corridors and sleeping in kitchens. He thought about what it meant to be 76 years old and have someone pick up your money for you off the floor. He thought about what it meant to have someone decide for the first time in possibly years that what happened to you mattered. He thought about the things his father had told him. Not the ones about power. The other ones. About the apartment with no morning light. About the landlord who came twice a year. About the neighbors who had lived their whole lives in that building and the landlord had never learned their names. He pressed his hands flat. He looked at the window. The names he knew now: Harold, Frank, Sophie, Edna. The orange lamp in the window on Archer Street. Ruth's watch. The American flag in the display case. A man who still gripped firmly after 76 years and every year those years had asked of him. He stayed at his desk until the settlement was signed at 5:58. Then he drove to Archer Street. He sat across from the building. He looked at the orange lamp in Harold's window. He pressed his hand flat on the wheel. He drove home. Brett Collier came to Archer Street on Saturday. He arrived at 10 in the morning in the specific discomfort of a man who had been told by his attorney and his corporate employer and the settlement documentation that this was not optional. He knocked on 1A. Harold opened the door. He stood in his doorway and looked at Brett Collier. Brett's attorney was behind him with the notarized document. Brett held the document. He did not look comfortable. This was appropriate. He read the apology. The specific witnessed documented version of what he had done in the pharmacy and what he had done as Archer Street's property manager and the acknowledgement that both were wrong. He read it to Harold's face. Harold stood in his doorway and received it. When Brett finished, Harold held out his hand. Not warmly. Not as forgiveness. As closure. Brett shook it. He left. Harold closed the door. He went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Edna Marsh came back in December. Not to the apartment, to see the progress first to decide. Elena had arranged the visit and the building manager Holloway had been required to appoint. An independent firm, not Collier, had met her at the door. She walked through the unit. She looked at the windows, the kitchen, the bedroom where she had lived for 11 years. She looked at the new heating vent in the corner. The full system replacement had been completed ahead of the 60-day deadline, independently verified. She looked at the building manager. I'll come back, she said. She moved back in on a Thursday. Harold helped carry boxes. Frank Riley helped carry boxes. Sophie Lamb brought soup. The four of them ate soup in Edna's kitchen. On the afternoon she moved back in, sitting around a table that had been in the building's common room and that Edna had been the one to bring here years ago. The building was warm. The radiator in the kitchen made the particular clicking sound of a new system doing its work. Sophie looked at the radiator. Last February I had the gas stove on all night, she said. Harold held his soup. I know, he said. And now it clicks, she said, watching the radiator. How it clicks, Frank said. They ate. The clicking. Vincent came back to Archer Street in the third week of December. Not announced. Harold had given him the building's door code. Offered, not requested, the gesture of a man who had decided someone was welcome. He knocked on 1A. Harold opened the door with the particular expression of someone who has been expecting a visitor and has also made coffee. 2 cups on the kitchen table. They sat. The audit, Harold said. Voss has been terminated, Vincent said. 14 additional certifications across 3 other districts have been flagged for review. The Attorney General's office has opened an inquiry into the certification chain. He held the cup. Merritt resigned. Harold held his cup. What happens to the other buildings? He said. The other properties Holloway owns. Tenant protection filings have been made for all 7, Vincent said. Elena is managing the process. Each building's tenant committee now has legal representation on retainer. Harold held the cup. Tenant committees, he said. 7 buildings, Vincent said. About 40 tenants. They have representation now. Harold held the cup. He held it the way he held the prescription bag. With both hands. Carefully. Your father, Harold said. You mentioned him. Vincent held his cup. He grew up on this street, he said. 3 doors down. The building's gone now. Harold held his cup. Did he know what you do? Harold said. Yes, Vincent said. Was he all right with it? Harold said. Vincent looked at the lamp. The orange lamp between the chair and the window, casting its warm circle. He said, make sure the people who have nowhere else to go have somewhere, Vincent said. And don't be selective about who that includes. Harold held his cup. He looked at Vincent. He was a good man, Harold said. Yes, Vincent said. He was. They held their coffee. The radiator clicked. Outside, December was doing what December did. Inside 1A on Archer Street, 2 men who had met in a pharmacy on a Wednesday afternoon sat at a kitchen table and were quiet in the specific warm way of people who did not need to fill the space. February came to Archer Street and the heat held. This was the whole sentence. The heat held. All 4 floors. All night. Through the week of February, a cold that dropped the city to 17 degrees and stayed there for 9 days. Sophie Lamb did not sleep in her kitchen. Harold did not wear his coat indoors. Frank Riley, who had a bad shoulder that flared in the cold, reported, to Harold at the mailboxes, that his shoulder had been better. Edna Marsh put her African violets back on the windowsill. She had brought them from her daughter's house in 2 plastic bags carefully, with the specific care of someone transporting things they had been keeping alive somewhere temporarily. She put them on the sill and the February light hit them and she stood in front of the window for a moment. Then she went to make tea. Brett Collier no longer managed any residential properties in the city. His termination from Crawford's Pharmacy had been processed the week after the corporate complaint. The documentation Elena had compiled about his management conduct on Archer Street had been submitted to the City Property Management Licensing Board. His license was under review. He was selling cars in a dealership in a suburb 40 minutes north. He had not been back to Fifth Avenue. Vincent visited Archer Street 3 times before spring. Not officially. Not with purpose beyond the cup of coffee and the orange lamp and the specific warmth of a kitchen where Harold made too much chili and the conversation moved easily between the news and the building and Ruth's garden that Harold described from memory with the precision of a man who had spent 30 years paying attention to the things she loved. On the last visit, Harold gave him something. A photograph. Black and white, slightly creased, the kind taken with a disposable camera at an event with bad indoor lighting. My unit in Bagram, Harold said. 2004. Vincent held the photograph. I was 62, Harold said. They tried to keep me back. I argued until they let me go. He held his coffee. The men in that photograph came home. He held the cup. I think about that. Vincent held the photograph. He looked at it. Why are you giving me this? He said. Harold held his cup. Because you're the kind of person who should have it, he said. I don't have children. I don't have anyone to give things to. He held the cup. I have Ruth's photograph and the flag in that one. He looked at the photograph in Vincent's hand. You should have that one. Vincent held the photograph. He held it with both hands. He held it the way Harold held his coffee, carefully. He put it in his jacket pocket. He pressed his hand against the pocket. This is what this story is really about. Not the settlement. Not Voss on administrative leave or Merritt resigned or Holloway's attorney calling at 1:15 asking if they could settle. It is about $3.70 on the floor of a pharmacy. And a man who had already been bending for a long time, to knees that didn't cooperate, to systems that didn't respond, to a building that was cold in February and an inspector who signed certifications in 11 minutes and a chain of small permissions that had told Harold Bennett over and over that his comfort was a secondary matter. And one person stepped forward. Not because they had to, because they were there, because they saw it, because seeing it and doing nothing was not available as an option. That is the whole story. The power. The settlement. The legal chain was dismantled from 3 points simultaneously. All of it came from one decision. The decision that what happened to Harold Bennett in a pharmacy on a Wednesday afternoon mattered. That he mattered. That 76 years and a veteran's cap and a blood pressure prescription mattered. Before you go, we want to ask you something real. Have you ever watched someone be humiliated in public? A store clerk, a patient, a customer. Someone treated by a person in authority like their dignity was an inconvenience? And what did you do? Did you step forward? Did you stay quiet? Did you wish you had done something different? Tell us in the comments. We have a community from all over the world. From New York to Texas, from the Pacific Coast to the Deep South, from the UK to Canada to Australia. And every comment tells us something true about what we owe each other in the ordinary moments. If this story moved you, share it with someone who has been told, by a system, by a manager, by the specific architecture of being somewhere without enough, that their comfort is a secondary matter. They're not secondary. They never were. We'll see you in the next story. Stay kind.